I smelled the gasoline before I saw the flames, thick, oily, and burning through the midnight rain like it had a purpose. My lavender fields, my shed, my life's work engulfed in fire, while a black SUV disappeared into the dark. This wasn't an accident. It was war, and they had just made their biggest mistake. I woke up that morning to the distant hum of bees dancing through the lavender rows, the air already thick with summer heat, and the comforting scent of rosemary and dry cedar. It was supposed to be a day like any other. Feed the chickens water, the beds trim back the older stalks of the Texas lavender I'd worked so hard to grow from seed. But instead I found a certified envelope duct taped to my front gate. No signature, no knock on the door, just tape and arrogance. The return address read, Rosebriar Estates Homeowners Association. I furrowed my brow. That couldn't be right. Lavender Hollow, my 6-acre patch of peace, wasn't part of Rosebriar. That was the entire point when I bought it. Independence. No mowed lawn mandates, no mailbox color codes, no committees deciding whether my shutters were aesthetic. Still, I opened it. Inside, a neatly folded letter on heavy cardstock, stamped in gold leaf. Dear Mr. Monroe, it began. This letter serves as your formal notice of enrollment into the Rosebriar Estates HOA, pursuant to our recent boundary realignment approved by the Travis County Planning Commission. Your annual dues of $5,000 are now due. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in escalating fines and enforcement actions as outlined in the attached regulation manual. I flipped through the thick packet, pages upon pages dictating acceptable roof shingles, livestock limitations, and absurdly the number of visible flower pots allowed per porch. I nearly laughed until I saw the violations section. Unapproved agricultural activity, non-compliant fencing, unauthorized exterior color palette. My barn hadn't been painted in a decade. It was weather-worn cedar. They called that a violation, but this wasn't a joke. Someone was trying to rope me into their tidy little empire. The next morning, I drove my dusty red truck down the winding road to Rosebriar's administrative office. The building stood like a Greek revival monument to excess, white columns, polished limestone, and a marble fountain that gurgled pointlessly in the triple-digit heat. I was directed to the office of Claudia Whitmore, HOA president. She didn't rise when I entered. Just looked up from her desk with a practiced smile that never touched her eyes. Mr. Monroe, she said sweetly, how may I help you? I placed the letter and packet down on her desk. This must be a mistake. Lavender Hollow isn't part of Rosebriar Estates. Never has been. Her smile widened slightly. Actually, it is now. Our boundaries were expanded last month as part of a community realignment for aesthetic cohesion and environmental oversight. I assure you the process was approved by the county. She slid a laminated map across the desk, red lines freshly drawn to encompass my property. A signature scribbled at the bottom, Derek Lang County Planning Director. I clenched my jaw. You can't just expand your reach and claim private land. That's not how it works. There was no notice, no hearing, no public comment period. This is a violation of state property law. Claudia's eyes gleamed, her voice lowering ever so slightly. Mr. Monroe, I'm sure you're used to big city politics, but out here things are done differently. If you're not willing to be a team player, that's your choice. Just be aware the HOA has full authority to enforce its regulations. As I left her office, I passed by a decorative display of awards for community excellence. All I could see was rot beneath the gloss. Back at home, I immediately pulled up the county GIS records. Just as I expected, my land still appeared as unincorporated, not part of Rosebriar. No documentation, no signed consent, no legal annexation process. I snapped screenshots of everything. Then I made 2 calls. First to Mabel Trent, an older Rosebriar resident who had lived there since long before it became a gated kingdom of HOA zealots. We'd exchanged seedlings at the farmer's market once. She knew the neighborhood's secrets. Second, I called Sierra Collins, my longtime assistant at the Texas Environmental Review Board, the one thread of my old life I hadn't cut. You're still technically a voting board member, she reminded me. You never resigned. I know, I said. And I think someone's about to regret assuming I'm just some sleepy lavender farmer. Later that afternoon, Mabel drove up in her old Buick, the trunk full of zucchini and suspicion. She stepped out squinting in the sunlight. She's done it again, hasn't she? I raised a brow. You mean Claudia? Mabel nodded grimly. This is the 4th time. Every few years, she finds a way to expand Rosebriar, always just enough to capture a few acres of someone else's land. She finds them into submission, then either they pay or sell. Each plot ends up developed into a cookie-cutter McMansion. The HOA fees double, and Claudia's friends at the county get their slice. I exhaled slowly. How's she pulling this off, Derek Lang? He's been planning commissioner for a decade. Used to be Claudia's college boyfriend, if the rumors are true. I stared out at my fields. The lavender swayed and rose like ocean waves. She wants this land for something more than backyard views. It didn't take long to find out why. A few days later, Sierra called me from Austin, her voice tight. Ellis, I just found something. Claudia submitted a $60 million development proposal to the TURB 6 weeks ago. It's for lithium extraction beneath the Rosebriar expansion zone. The final environmental clearance, it needs your signature. I stood in silence. So that was it. It gets worse, she added. They're planning to use a process involving hexavalent compounds, cheap fast, and guaranteed to seep into groundwater. If they drill near your land, they could contaminate the entire aquifer. My land wasn't just a pretty field, it was the key, and they needed me to sign it away. I looked toward the lavender rose, my hands balling into fists. Claudia had underestimated me. She thought she could buy bully or trick her way into getting what she wanted. But I wasn't just some retired gardener. I was the last line between greed and a poisoned earth, and I was done being quiet. That night I sat at my kitchen table, lights dimmed, flipping through the HOA violation packet again. One line stood out in particular: failure to comply with landscaping conformity guidelines may result in the removal of all non-compliant flora. They wanted to uproot my lavender. Let them try. I sent a message to Sierra start gathering documentation on all boundary approvals for Rosebriar going back 10 years. Pull environmental filings too. I want everything. She replied within minutes, already on it. Then I texted Mabel. You ever go to HOA meetings? Her reply, I never miss one. And they never see me coming. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window into the moonlit fields. They wanted to fight. They were about to walk into a legal wildfire, and this time the scent in the air wouldn't be lavender. It would be smoke and justice. That night after I sent the final text to Sierra and Mabel, I didn't sleep. I watched the silhouette of Lavender Hollow under the moonlight, the rows of purple stillness, the barn creaking in the breeze, and the porch light casting long shadows on the gravel. I thought of every acre I'd walked, every stalk I'd planted, every drop of sweat that had soaked into the soil. This land was never just property, it was restoration, redemption, and they were coming for it. By sunrise, retaliation had already begun. A notice nailed to my gate claimed I was in violation of HOA bylaws for unauthorized agricultural production, demanding an immediate halt to all lavender cultivation. Attached were photographs. Someone had trespassed and documented my fields like a crime scene. By the time I finished reading the letter, another envelope arrived. This one cited non-compliant fencing, claiming my wooden perimeter was unsafe and out of visual harmony with the Rosebriar neighborhood aesthetic. That fence had stood for 15 years long before Rosebriar existed. They were digging deep manufacturing rules to drown me in bureaucracy. The next day, a third notice: improper soil drainage and irrigation patterns. I laughed bitterly. My irrigation system was gravity-fed and eco-certified. The HOA wasn't enforcing rules. They were weaponizing them. I contacted Sheriff Donna Cruz. She listened patiently, but warned me that as long as the HOA's claims didn't involve physical threats or violence, her hands were tied. Document everything she said. And be careful, Ellis. Claudia doesn't play fair, and she's got people in her pocket. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter and discovered 2 of my motion cameras smashed. Clean break. Not wildlife. Someone knew what they were doing. The next morning, a stranger in a navy polo with a Rosebriar HOA badge parked near my fence line and began taking more photos, zooming in on the barn, the shed, even the chickens. I stepped onto the porch and called out, "You're on private property. Turn that car around." He didn't respond, just backed up slowly and disappeared down the road. That evening, I called Jasper Lynn. I remembered his name from an old county feature about unethical HOA takeovers. He'd lost his home after exposing embezzlement inside the Cresthaven HOA, fined into bankruptcy by the very people he wrote about. He answered on the first ring. Mr. Monroe, I've been waiting on a story like yours. We met the next day at a diner off Route 12. I laid out the documents, Claudia's boundary expansion map, the permit override signed by Derek Lang, and the $5,000 dues notice. Jasper whistled. You're not dealing with a neighborhood dispute. This is organized land flipping. It's a racket, and she's done it before. He pulled out his laptop. Give me 48 hours and I'll connect this to Cresthaven Northfield, maybe even down to Manor County. Sierra called me later that night. Her voice was tight with urgency. I got the full environmental proposal. You were right, Ellis. The lithium site runs directly under Lavender Hollow, and they're using a chemical leaching method that wasn't even disclosed to the state. The original report flagged it as a catastrophic groundwater risk, but that version was buried. The one submitted to TURB, it's a rewrite, sanitized and signed by a different firm. So they're trying to poison the aquifer, I said quietly. All 4 counties, she confirmed. And you're the last sign-off. My hands tightened around the phone. Claudia didn't just want my land, she needed my silence. That night I reinforced my fence, reinstalled 2 hidden cameras, and backed every file I had to the cloud. Just after midnight I heard something. A thud, then silence. I stepped out with a flashlight and caught a glimpse of movement near the west tree line. But when I got there, whoever it was had vanished. The next morning I found muddy footprints leading up to my shed. One of the lavender rows had been deliberately torn up, flowers stomped and scattered like confetti. I didn't call the sheriff. I called Jasper. I'm ready to go public. He arrived with a photographer that afternoon and spent 3 hours walking the property, asking questions, documenting everything. He promised to have the first part of the expose out by Friday. I hoped it would make a dent. I didn't expect what happened next. The storm hit late Thursday night. Rain poured in sideways sheets, lightning cracked the sky, and thunder rolled across the hills like cannon fire. I just finished feeding the horses when I caught the scent, sharp, oily, unnatural. Gasoline. I ran toward the shed. Flames leapt high into the air, dancing along the edges of my drying lavender racks and licking at the sky in violent orange tongues. I grabbed the garden hose, turned on the emergency tank, and tried to douse the base. But it was too late. The fire fed on oil and wood. The heat melted the hose in my hands. I called 911, and within 15 minutes, the volunteer fire crew arrived. But the shed, the tools, the harvest, I watched them all go up in smoke. I stood barefoot in the mud, soaked to the bone, holding the charred remains of a lavender stalk in my hand as the firefighters pulled back. One of them handed me a twisted gas can they found at the origin point. Sheriff Cruz arrived shortly after. This wasn't lightning, she said grimly. Someone wanted this fire. She pointed to tire tracks in the mud, 2 sets, one leading in, one peeling out. We'll open an investigation, but I'm going to be honest, Ellis. I've seen this before. They'll say it was an accident, that the storm caused it, and without a license plate or a witness, she didn't have to finish. I knew what she meant. I went inside, showered off the ash and smoke, then sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I began compiling everything: timelines, photographs, documents, emails. I sent a packet to Sierra, another to Jasper, and a third to Mabel. That Sunday, Jasper's story hit the front page of the county paper. HOA hijack how. A 60-mile lithium project is built on fraud, fire, and fear. The article named Claudia Whitmore directly. It included side-by-side comparisons of the original and forged environmental reports, maps of boundary changes, and testimony from past victims who had lost land under similar schemes. Mabel even went on record telling how Claudia had once fined her for using non-compliant garden statuary to force her into HOA meetings. She's turned the HOA into a personal empire, Mabel told the paper, but this time she picked the wrong farmer. 2 days later, Claudia's son, Gavin Whitmore, called me. His voice shook. Mr. Monroe, I didn't know how far she'd gone. I thought she was just trying to boost community value. But I saw the financials. She's been routing HOA funds to offshore accounts. She's falsified invoices. And those environmental engineers, she threatened to sue them into bankruptcy if they spoke out. Will you testify? I asked. He hesitated. She's still my mother, but yes, I'll do what's right. That night I walked through what remained of my lavender fields. Ash crunched beneath my boots. The rows were blackened and broken, but I saw something: tiny green shoots pushing up through the scorched earth. The lavender would return, and so would I. They tried to burn my land, but all they'd done was ignite something stronger, a fire that wouldn't stop until the truth came out and justice bloomed. The lavender was starting to return. Small, fragile shoots pushed through the blackened soil like quiet defiance. It had only been a week since the fire, but the land like me was refusing to stay down. The scent of char and ash still lingered, especially in the mornings when the wind rolled low, but hope clung to the air too. Jasper's expose had taken off like wildfire. Local news picked it up then, a regional station, and by the weekend the headline was trending: statewide HOA president tied to environmental fraud and land grab scandal. Claudia Whitmore's smiling headshot was plastered everywhere, from morning news segments to angry Facebook threads filled with outraged residents and calls for a criminal investigation. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was a movement. Former property owners from other HOA takeovers began coming forward, sharing eerily similar tales of extorted fines, forced sales, and mysterious fires. Sierra had compiled a full dossier for the Texas Environmental Review Board, and the timing couldn't have been better. TURB had just called for an emergency hearing to reevaluate the Rosebriar expansion permit. I was told I'd be given time to present, but Claudia's lawyers had already filed a motion to suspend my voting rights, accusing me of bias harassment and open hostility toward their client. The hearing was set for Monday morning in Austin. I arrived early, suit-pressed files in hand, accompanied by Sierra and Jasper, both of whom looked more like seasoned investigators than a legal assistant and a journalist. Claudia was already there, seated between two expensive-looking attorneys in gray pinstripe suits. She didn't acknowledge me, but her eyes followed my every move, sharp and cold. Her confidence hadn't wavered, not yet. The hearing began with procedural formalities, then moved quickly to Claudia's motion. Her lead attorney stood. Mr. Monroe has publicly disparaged our client, leaked confidential development documents to the press, and made himself the center of a campaign of defamation. We submit into evidence an audio recording where he states, quote, "I'll sink this project if it's the last thing I do." They played the recording over the loudspeakers, my voice unmistakable but stitched together like some Frankenstein tape. I'd never said those words in that combination. I looked to Sierra. She nodded. Jasper stood immediately. "Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to demonstrate that this recording is a manipulated splice using cut segments from different conversations. I can show you the waveform breakdowns." The chairman nodded. "Proceed." Jasper connected his laptop and projected a visual timeline of the audio. Notice the inconsistent background noise and waveform jumps. These phrases were taken from phone calls and interviews, cut and pasted together. It's a fabrication. Gasps rippled through the room. Claudia's attorney tried to object, but the damage was done. Then Sierra stood. "In addition to this, we've uncovered financial irregularities tied directly to Mrs. Whitmore's use of HOA funds, as well as a second original version of the environmental report that warns of irreversible contamination to the Trinity Aquifer." She handed the board-printed copies. Claudia sat stiffly now, her poise cracking. Then came the unexpected moment that turned the hearing. Commissioner Davis, who'd remained silent throughout, leaned into his mic. "I need to disclose something. 3 weeks ago, I received a call from a county official name withheld, pressuring me to approve this expansion or risk losing key infrastructure contracts for my district. I believe this may not be an isolated incident." Silence dropped like a stone. The chairman ordered an immediate recess for deliberation. During the break, I stepped out into the hall for air. Claudia followed. Her voice was quiet, venomous. "You think you've won, don't you? I think the truth has a longer reach than your money," I said. Her mask slipped. "You're nothing but a stubborn old man with a dead flower field. And when this vote fails, I'll have everything bulldozed and sold by spring." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Gavin, Mr. Monroe. "I'm here. I need to testify." He walked into the boardroom with a file in his hand and something heavier in his eyes. "I'm Gavin Whitmore, Claudia's son. I'm also the accountant for the Rosebriar HOA. I've brought evidence that my mother used HOA funds for personal vacations, falsified development contracts, and directed bribes to local planning officials to fast-track the expansion." Claudia turned white. "Gavin, don't you dare. No, Mom. I saw what you did to these people. What you almost did to him." He handed the file to the board. The original environmental report was buried because It made the project financially unviable. You hired a second firm to create a watered-down version. The board reconvened. After reviewing the new evidence, the chairman made the final statement. Due to overwhelming documentation of fraud, environmental misconduct, and coercion, the Rosebriar expansion permit is hereby suspended indefinitely. The entire file will be forwarded to the State Attorney General's Office for criminal investigation. Claudia's attorneys stood gathering their things. She didn't move. I didn't smile. I just looked at her and said, "You should have left the lavender alone." That night back at Lavender Hollow, the air was cool, crisp, and finally quiet. I sat on the porch watching the moon rise when I saw headlights approaching. A familiar black SUV pulled into the drive Claudia's Escalade. She stepped out holding a gas can in one hand and a lighter in the other, her blouse half untucked, hair wild. Sheriff Cruz's patrol car wasn't far behind. I'd called her the moment Gavin testified. Claudia Whitmore Cruz shouted through the bullhorn, "Put it down." Claudia stepped onto the porch, soaking the wood with gasoline, her movements erratic. "You don't get to win," she screamed. "If I can't have the land, no one will." I hit the switch beside the door. The emergency irrigation system kicked on, drenching the porch in a downpour. Her lighter sparked, twice fizzled, useless. Cruz rushed forward, tackled her, and handcuffed her in the mud. "It was all supposed to be mine," she sobbed. "The minerals, the development, everything. He ruined it. You ruined yourself," Cruz said quietly. The next morning, Claudia was charged with arson, fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of public funds. The TURB appointed a task force to review every development she'd ever touched. Gavin agreed to testify at the state level in exchange for immunity. Rosebriar's HOA was officially dissolved 2 weeks later. In a special election, Mabel Trent was voted interim president of a newly restructured neighborhood board. One of her first acts was to draft a proposal for a community garden and conservation space. A month later, a grant from the state, approved unanimously by TURB, funded the creation of the Lavender Conservation Park, stretching between Rosebriar and my ranch. The land would remain untouched, undeveloped, a green sanctuary bordered by native blooms. At the dedication ceremony, families gathered on my property. Kids played near the newly replanted lavender rows, and neighbors, once divided by Claudia's lies, shared food and laughter under the open sky. As I stepped up to say a few words, a small girl handed me a chalk drawing Lavender Hollow with trees, birds, and rows of flowers. Scrawled beneath it were 5 simple words: "Where flowers bloom, bullies don't." I smiled and looked out at the crowd. "Sometimes you don't win through shouting," I said. "Sometimes you win by planting something that outlives the ones who tried to bury you." And as the sun set over Lavender Hollow, the scent of blooming fields returned, stronger than smoke, louder than threats, and rooted deeper than fear. Justice had bloomed. Would you like a title suggestion for this full story series? Sometimes the fight for what's right doesn't happen in courtrooms or headlines. It happens on our porches, in our gardens, in the quiet resistance of standing your ground against those who believe power and intimidation can silence the truth. Through the story of Ellis Monroe and Lavender Hollow, we see the very real danger of unchecked authority, how a corrupt HOA president and her network nearly destroyed a man's life, his land, and the water source of entire communities, all for the sake of profit. But more importantly, we witness the strength of character, persistence, and integrity. Ellis didn't fight back with fists. He fought back with facts, with quiet determination, and with allies who believed that truth still mattered. The lesson is simple but powerful. Never underestimate the impact of one person standing up for what's right, especially when everyone else is too afraid to speak. Whether it's a small-town farmer or a retired attorney, justice can start with a single voice refusing to be silenced. To you, our listener, here's what we hope you take from this. If someone tries to bully you into silence, weaponize rules against you, or pressure you to back down, remember that your dignity isn't for sale. Your voice matters. And when you speak truth, even against powerful forces, you're never truly alone. Others are watching. Others are waiting for anyone to go first. Surround yourself with people like Sierra, like Mabel, like Jasper, those who will stand with you when the winds rise. And remember that sometimes doing the right thing won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it will be worth it. And from all of us at US Daily Story, thank you for listening to this powerful story. If it made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone who once stood their ground, or someone who was forced to surrender when they shouldn't have shared this story. Let others know that standing up matters, that the flowers do come back even after the fire, and that bullies, no matter how bold they seem, eventually face the consequences of their choices. We appreciate you being part of this community. Keep standing strong, keep standing tall, and we'll see you in the next story.